Hi guys, welcome back to the As One podcast, a place where we love God and we love people. And our mission is to make Jesus too big to ignore. I'm your host, Jack. I've been on an earlier episode of the podcast sharing my testimony, and I'm here today with Pedro. We're going to share his testimony and get into how Jesus has transformed his life. So let's get started. It's nice to have you here. I'm excited to hear your testimony because I kind of know a little bit about sort of your childhood and how you came to church and stuff. And obviously, you're really involved with the tech side of things at church. But I don't know so much about exactly how you kind of came to know God and everything that happened kind of up to that point. If you want to start, maybe I don't know, you could start with a little bit about your role at church, or something like that.
Yeah. Well, at the moment, my role in terms of the church is, like you said, it's more the tech side. So, looking at the AV side, sometimes when we do go live, the live streams and the visuals on our screens and the lyrics. At times, we do sound as well. Depending on if our sound engineer John, shout out John, if he's around. But yeah, so for me, it's more of kind of a little bit of everything. Photography as well, just dabble in everything. Jack of all trades.
Exactly. You've been doing a lot of photography recently. You're always involved with everything, the tech side of things, and like the socials as well. You basically hold the church together, I think.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but yeah.
No, Jesus holds the church together.
Exactly. But no, yeah, it's I guess it's a, oh goodness, sorry. It's a bit of a kind of I wouldn't say difficult, but very varied sort of role I do at church, and it every week can be different, which is fun, keeps it interesting, which is enjoyable.
Yeah, nice.
But yeah,
so so I joined this church like 2 years ago, and you were doing the tech side of things then, and you continue to keep doing more and more as time goes on. But I guess you weren't always doing this, right?
No. So, well, funny enough, actually, you say that the 2 year mark when you joined, that's kind of when I came back into the church. Okay. So, well, I think without jumping ahead too much, but so from the church when I first started, about 2 years ago, where I rejoined the church, I've always been in that kind of tech and helping. It's always been kind of a calling for me, and it's always my forte. It's the stuff I enjoy. So I think for me, it was always easy to kind of roll into that. And at the time, we didn't really have someone to do that. So it kind of just hand in hand came together.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, so in terms of the last 2 years that I've been back at church, it's kind of developed more and more into trying to bring things forward. A lot of it was where we're not a big church, as you know, but we try to get the technology advanced and try to make things easier, better, and just try to elevate that quality. But yeah, that's kind of that. But I think if we're looking at my kind of life story and my testimony, should we say, I was originally actually born in Brazil, so I've technically Brazilian blood. Doesn't mean I can play football, but I can kick a ball around. But so born in Brazil, and my parents were missionaries, and they had a calling to come to the UK when I was around 5. So I think that was around 2000. You can do the calculation how old I am after that. But yeah, so around 2000, we came over here. No English, no nothing, no structure. We came to YWAM, Youth with a Mission. My parents, we stayed in, I think it was a 2-bed flat with me and 2 sisters and parents.
Wow, yeah.
Zero English, and at the time, because of the age I was in Brazil, I hadn't yet learned my alphabet or I hadn't yet started going to school properly. So I really didn't know how to read or write in Portuguese, and now I'm in England where I don't know how to read, write, or speak.
Yeah,
so it was a bit of a tough journey from there, and as you can imagine, the money from Brazil isn't as strong here, so that was also a challenge. But kind of in the youth and growing up, I've always grew up in church. So
Right, yeah. Okay.
we my parents are pastors of this church. I don't know if people know that, but being the pastor's children or pastor's son is a challenge at times, because obviously the
Yeah,
expectations
right.
are there for certain things.
Yeah, I always wondered that, like, because I obviously grew up completely outside of church, and you've had like kind of the opposite experience, growing
Yeah.
up in church. Was there like a pressure to get involved and help out and that kind of stuff? Like,
Yeah, there always was, yeah, and especially being kind of having Brazilian parents, Latino parents. I know
okay.
your wife's Brazilian. You know what it can be like.
I wouldn't know
So
anything about
no,
that.
of course, not on camera. We won't say that. But yeah, so I think for me, it was always that there was always a pressure to always make sure that you're at church, helping out, doing everything you can. There was never really a question. It was more just it's just expected. So for me, it was kind of from when I was born all the way through to kind of my early teenage years. It was church every Sunday.
Mm.
Don't plan anything for a Sunday because we're church, and then it's always helping out as and when, if it's to do with like I said, with the sounds, the visuals and stuff like that. So when we first opened this church, or my parents founded this church, that's where I was doing the lyrics, the projections, the sound. So it was kind of a throwing in the deep end.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that must have, I mean, yeah, I just can't understand what it would be like as a child to go to church, when your parents go there, because you're kind of going along with them. I
Yeah.
mean, at that, say when you were really young, maybe when you'd sort of just come over here, did you feel like you had a kind of relationship with God at that point, or was it just this sort of this thing your parents did that you had
Yeah.
to do?
Do you know what? That's a very good point. And I think for me, it was, like you said, because I grew up in it. I was not forced, but it was expected for me to go and do the things at church. It was more of a kind of a chore or a hobby rather than an actual kind of relationship with God. So for me, it was just kind of just part of the routine, going to
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, going to church, and everything like that. So as I kind of grew up into my early teenage years, I started having friends, wanting to do other things other than obviously
Yeah.
um, being a child. That's where it started kind of getting a little bit more difficult to try and difficult to keep going to church every Sunday.
Yeah, I
Or
mean, I could imagine, because when you get to that stage in life where you're a young teenager, you're really trying to testing rules, you're trying to figure out who you are, and sort of like, yeah, trying to figure out what you think about the world. And
exactly.
yeah, I mean, Danny, my wife, had a kind of similar experience where she grew up in church and then kind of moved away from it as she
Yeah.
got to that sort of teenage stage as well. Um, yeah, what was that stage like then? So you're helping out at church. You're maybe not. Do you believe in God at that point? Are you?
Yeah, I think I've always believed in God just because of the fact that kind of, not because I was brought up into it, but just because everything you see, the things you read, the where you're around, you kind of, it's inevitable to believe in God because of the stories you hear, the things you see, the things you hear, the things you read as well. But for me, when I was kind of like that early teenage years, I started playing football, and then the Sunday games used to always be an excuse. So
Right, I see.
we kind of bargained and got 1 week
Yeah.
on, 1 week off, and then before you know it, it's every week it's football. And then as I grew up and got myself a job, job became the thing.
Yeah.
So I was every Sunday at work. And then after that, by that point where I was kind of in a full-time job, I didn't even come to church at all. So
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily be able to say exactly where that kind of change happened or what caused it, but it was just kind of gradual change where
Right.
from going every week to not going at all.
So it wasn't so much like a deliberate decision. I don't want to be a part of this. It's more you just moved away, and then
Yeah.
maybe it became less of a priority, and then maybe if you'd grown up and hadn't had any kind of an encounter with God for yourself and chosen it maybe for yourself, it just gradually started to I don't know, move away and just your life just changed kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, and I think it's so easy to happen. And obviously now at the position I'm in now, in terms of my relationship with God, and the things I do with the church, but it's so easy for you to just that 1 week just be it's just going to be this week, and then next thing maybe it's just 1 week a month, and then it's 2 weeks a month, and then next thing you know it's you're only coming to church once a month because you've got everything else that's priority. And I think that's what kind of happened to me when I was a little bit younger. Don't get me wrong, growing up and your parents forcing you to go to church, and you get rebellious, and that's probably what happened to me, where I just got to the point where I just didn't enjoy going to church, and it was more of a chore than it was an actual kind of privilege to serve, to help, to do things at church. So I almost got to the point where I sort of resented going to church, or didn't like the church, despite I still believed in God and everything like that. But I just didn't want to go to church, because it was always that you have to go and you have to put on a smile, you have to do this, you have to do that. And for me, especially as a teenager, it was difficult. But like I said, once I then kind of moved into that full-time job, I completely moved away from church. I moved out of my parents' house, and I was living in Enfield at the time. And I think from there, where I moved out from my parents, is where I kind of completely went, should we say, into the world. And I think that's where it kind of spiraled downhill, and it was more of, I was just living the life of the world, should we say, and it was like partying, drinking, taking drugs, doing basically everything that I wanted, or that I desired, or that the world kind of put on people to say that's what enjoyment is.
Right. Okay.
And that was a kind of a stage in my life that I'm quite an intense person. So I think once I start doing something, I do it kind of very intensely, and I think I took that literally as well when I was doing all those things. So I think I went a bit overboard. With that.
Yeah, it's so interesting just hearing the way you describe that, because like even since like I had this like encounter and I came to church and everything, there was a point, I think maybe last year, where we got really busy. There was lots of stuff happening on weekends, and there was a period where for maybe like a month we didn't come to church. And during that time, like I sort of wasn't praying as much and wasn't reading the Bible as much, and even as someone that, believed, I started to have that kind of distance happen as well, just from not being around and being exposed to it. So yeah, you kind of had that happen, and you just went completely away, and it just basically to the point where you didn't want anything to do with church. So this is like how old are you now? Like 18-ish or something? Or?
That was kind of from 18 to about early 20s sort of time frame.
Okay.
But I think just jumping back to the point you made, I think that is such a critical point in in your life in the church or in Christ or as a Christian, is having that support mechanisms around you. So like you just mentioned, where you're talking about where you didn't come for a couple of weeks, you felt a little bit distant, but the fact that you still had kind of people around you that believed in the same things, they still kind of pushed you to do it. There was still that thing there.
Your mum messaged us like, really? Is everything okay? You guys coming back? And we
exactly.
were like, maybe we should.
And I think that was probably the biggest difference for me when I was a teenager, where I didn't really have that around me, where because of the fact that I moved out of the house, I was working full time, everyone around me I didn't have any Christian friends or anything like that, and I didn't go to church, so obviously I'd never had that either. So I think that's what kind of sent me over. But in terms of time frame, we were looking around 17, 18 through to about 22, 23. Again, dates and I'm awful.
Okay, but, so that goes on for a while, like long enough for you to just be kind of living this different life. I guess probably at that point you maybe felt like church was just this thing that was in your childhood, and this was your life now, kind of thing. But yeah, how do you end up coming back to church then?
So it's kind of an interesting story, and I think it's probably similar to yourself, where it was the women in our life that did it. It's my beautiful wife Paola. She we actually grew up together in Brazil, so we knew each other's kids. I don't remember any of the stories, but apparently she used to run after me. I was
Oh,
a cool
really?
kid apparently back in the day.
What
Apparently,
happened?
exactly. I know. Tell me about it. But yeah. So we grew up together. We moved here. Our family moved over to the UK. And 20 years later, we never spoke to each other since. I didn't even know she existed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I was at a wedding in Spain, and I posted something on my Instagram, and she commented on it, and then we started getting talking from there. And then next thing you know, she's in the UK visiting,
Mm-hmm.
and then COVID hit. She got stuck here for a little bit longer. I then decided to pop the question,
Oh,
and
wow,
then
yeah.
within probably a year and a half, we were married. So
Wow, that's
it was quite
amazing.
quick. But then,
That's really amazing because I know marriage is something that can happen quite quickly in Christian relationships, but you're coming from the world and you still wanted that. You wanted to get married and
yeah,
make that commitment.
that's true. Yeah, and that's the thing. I think at that point in my life where kind of um, she was basically. I feel she was sent from God, because at the time of that sort of time in my life where um, I was probably I've gone so far into the things that I was doing, like the drugs, the partying, where I was kind of coming out the other end, and I was in a position where if I didn't stop, I'll either end up in jail or in a ditch
Mm,
somewhere.
right.
So I think where she came in at that time, it was kind of that perfect time for me to. I was probably, let's say, vulnerable enough that I could kind of accept or allow that sort of stuff to happen. I would say if it
Mm-hmm.
was a couple of years before, I think because I was so deep into it and kind of my mindset was this is the life I want to live, I would
Mm-hmm.
have probably rejected it. But because of kind of how vulnerable or fragile I was at that time, I was kind of a bit more open to it. So then that's probably where it happened. But from talking, and obviously you know love can do a lot of things, can't it? So where she would, I wasn't going to church at the start of our relationship, and I was living out of the house. So I moved out, but then I moved back in with my parents, started going to church just to try and impress her. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
you got to do
Right.
some things to
Okay.
try and impress her. And then that's where it can then started picking up again. She then moved over here, and then we just got more and more involved in the church.
Interesting. So you did start coming back to church, but maybe it wasn't completely for you. Maybe it was
I
maybe
would
not for the right motivations, but
exactly.
like that's interesting. So at that time, when you were coming back to church, did it start to have any effect on you, or was this just you were really just interested in
in
pursuing Paula?
in love, shall we say? I think it was, and being open and honest, I think it was genuinely just that initial part where I was trying to kind of do the right things for her, because that's the stuff that she kind of,
Mm-hmm.
because she grew up a Christian, she was Christian her whole life, she has been. She's never done anything other than that, which I commend her, because obviously I've been out and in. But I think for me, that was the start of what caused it. But then what really kind of changed it, and it took her a lot of convincing for me to do it, was the
Mm-hmm.
encounter with God.
Okay, yeah.
So that,
For anybody that doesn't know what that is, so I think is it NCF that does it? I don't know if
yeah,
other churches do this as well, but I think every 6 months there's a kind of like a weekend long workshop that we do at the church called the Encounter, and it's just time really to come before God basically and to try and have an actual encounter with God. And I've done it. Lots of us have done it, and it's like a real time of healing and a time for God to show us sort of the things that we need to work on as well.
yeah,
Okay, so you do that. So that's because that's quite a big step. Then at
yeah.
that point, you still weren't
I
fully
think,
committed, but you chose
yeah,
to
I
do
think
it.
that time I was, because she was living here in the UK. We were going to church. It was kind of, we were back in. I was back in church full time, should we say, helping out with the sound and stuff like that. But the more time we kind of spent in the churches, the more I kind of started building that relationship with God. And then it came to a point where every time that my mum, the pastor of the church, used to run an encounter, she'd always be, Pedro, get on it, get on it, get on.
Right. Yeah.
I always be like, no. I always used to fob it off. But then this time, Paola's the one who kind of instigated it, and it was it took a lot of convincing, to the point where even the day that it was going to start, I wasn't going to come. I was just going to find an excuse, or just outright say,
Yeah.
I'm not going. But I did go, and then I think that really was that catalyst for me to kind of change from that. The reason for going to church was for my wife at the time, or for other reasons, or because I wanted to help out in the sound, to actually going to church for my own personal reasons, because of my relationship with God, and I wanted to serve in the church.
Wow, that's so that was the moment. That's like the big turning point. And could you maybe like talk about a little bit about what happened? Maybe you don't have to go into too many details or anything, but what did God show you, or what was it that changed for you at that time? Or...
The biggest thing for me was it kind of, because I've grown up in the church, everything I'm not saying I know everything about Christianity, the Bible, or Jesus, but kind of, because I've grown up around that sort of stuff, I'm familiar with everything. So I think the encounter with God was more of that kind of reconnection with God, and also kind of that refresh in my mind of everything that kind of I already knew, or the stuff that I'm familiar with. So I think the encounter with God, and if I'm honest with you, the encounter with God, despite it was a powerful weekend, but I think that was the catalyst. I don't think that was the kind of the change. It started, it knocked the change over, but it was the weeks after, and the kind of the time spent more into His Word, praying more, and kind of reading the Bible more, and like even now, where me and Paula, we're reading the Bible, the year plan, where you do it chronologically.
Yeah, right.
I can say it right, but as it happened is what they call it. So then we're reading that at the moment, and even then, despite the fact I know all the stories from when I grew up, or even when we learn at the church, but it's just we're learning new things every time. And I think.
Sorry, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think, like, I grew up in a Christian primary school, and I think probably a lot of people in this country, because we're all aware of, everyone's aware of Jesus, and we have sort of an understanding of certain stories from the Bible. I think a lot of people might feel like they understand what Christianity is, and like what it's about, what they believe and stuff. But when you actually dig into it, like if you go and read the Gospels, you see like how much like incredible wisdom is in there. It's like profound. But we all sort of, many of us have this kind of sense of what we think Christianity is. But like in my experience, like nothing I thought about what the religion was actually is what really people believe. And it's interesting that you say that, because you had so much more exposure than most people, and you still felt the same way.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there, because it's two different things, from someone telling you about it or trying to teach you about it, to you actually learning or experiencing, reading it yourself. And I think that's the key difference, where yes, it's important for people obviously to preach a message, like a sermon every Sunday, or people to be out on the streets evangelizing. I can't use my words, but it's important for that individual to actually want to have that change, and to want to learn a bit more. I think, don't be wrong, it's brilliant having the sermons and things like that, but using that as kind of the gateway into further reading or further studies of that kind of passage, or that topic, should we say. I think, like you said, I think that's really the difference, where as I've been reading it recently, is you're understanding it a bit more, you're having a different perspective of it. So you're reading it, and I know this story, I've known about this story the whole time, but then it's kind of looking at it in a different mindset, or different. It's like you're wearing a different set of glasses, and you're seeing it different. But yeah, I think it's important for, as Christians especially, and even if you're not and you're interested in Christianity, it's more of the fact that listen to what's out there, use that as a gateway, use that as a guide to kind of know where to go for stuff, but then yourself actually step into it and try to learn it yourself. I think that was the biggest change for me.
Right, yeah. Okay, so now you're kind of starting to develop a real relationship with God. You have this encounter. that was what? How long ago was that? It's not too long ago. Was it just a few
When
couple of
was that
years or
encounter?
something?
I think it
Was that the encounter? Have you done? It's only one encounter you've done, because I remember being there when you did an encounter.
Yeah, I
Is
think.
that the one?
Did I do mine after yours? I think.
Yeah,
I
so
think
it's
it was.
not too
Or
long ago now, maybe like a
no,
year or
it
so
was
ago or
definitely
something.
less. Yeah, about a year ago
Um,
max.
okay, so that's kind of bringing us up to now. You've had this encounter. And you're starting to build this relationship. And what does that actually look like in terms of your living? You and Paul are married. You're living together now, right? You've got each other, so obviously you can help each other, pray together, things like that. You joined our cell group as well, and we all once a week we meet up and do a Bible study together. So you're really going like full on committed into it now. How do things start to change for you from that point? Is there
Yeah.
any like real noticeable differences or anything you struggled with to start with?
Yeah, I think, as you can imagine, going from the kind of worldly living to being back at church and doing everything the way I don't want to say the way we should, but doing things differently. Um, it was a big kind of change, and it felt like quite an abrupt change, despite the fact it was quite a couple, like a year or two period. But it felt like an abrupt change going from everything I was doing to, excuse me, now going to church. But the biggest kind of difference for me was because of I was so used to doing what I wanted when I wanted, to now kind of, not saying that I had a structure or anything like that, but just if I wanted to go out drinking, I could go out drinking. If I wanted to smoke, if I wanted to take drugs, I could. Whatever. I didn't have any rules.
Yeah.
To now going into sort of rules, I think that was the biggest kind of change. And one of the things that kind of opened my eyes was like swearing. And don't get me wrong, I'm still going through it now. It's the difficulty I have, but that was one of the things that was highlighted. Is just part of my change, should we say, is kind of that sort of things. And I'll put it out there. I'm still going through that journey of changing and
Right,
everything.
yeah.
And you notice it in
Yeah,
church.
I swear
There's-
sometimes still,
yeah.
and I'm like, oh. Sometimes Danny calls me out on it, and I'm
Yeah.
like, leave me alone.
But I think, do you know what? I think that's important, actually, having someone there to hold you accountable, because it's so easy. And I know we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it's so easy to slip into the habits that you can you can resort back into, and before you know it, you're far down the line before you even realize.
So God
Yeah.
is kind of showing you like little things, like maybe you should be aware of how you speak and that kind of thing. And it's probably not just swearing, but I'm sure there's other things as well. Because that's a really important message, is that the things that we say, Jesus says, it's not the things that go into our mouth that can defile us, but the things that come out. It's that we can curse ourselves with what we say. So yeah, you're kind of coming into this space where you're starting to try and actually make these changes. And I don't know how you felt, but I remember having a lot of resistance when I first started trying to listen and follow the Holy Spirit. I felt almost like the same kind of feelings I had when I was just living in the world. Like, I'm my own boss. Like, I don't want to be told what to do, kind of thing. And it's only now, like years down the line, that I can understand, looking back, like, even if I didn't understand these changes that God was trying to lead me towards, they were for my own good. Like, they've actually made me a better person. They've changed me in lots of different ways. It's sort of like when you're in a situation, it's sometimes very difficult to imagine what it looks like to be in a completely different situation. Like, you almost can't imagine it. And if I feel like with a lot of what I've experienced, at least with being led by God, it's that He's kind of directing me in these ways that don't make sense, and then gradually start to make sense, kind of as you sort of mature and as you start to like implement that into your life as well.
No, 100%. I'd agree with you. Where there's been times in my life where it's like you said, it makes no sense. Why are we going down this road? Why I don't want to be doing this. This is hard work, or this isn't the right choice. And then flip to the end of the road, and you're well, that made sense. I knew it was going to be okay all along. Yeah. But yeah, I think you're right. And part of kind of the transition back into the church and into where I am now is that I can see my life back when I was in the world to where I am now. Where when I was in the world, my life was everything was falling apart. I'd struggle to hold down a job. I'm in crazy amounts of debt, just going out partying, having no relationships with anyone, like no true relationships or kind of friendships. And then to where I am now, where completely debt free, being able to move out and afford my own place, and actually build, because where it felt back in the day when I was in the world, it was I was trying to keep my head above water. Now it's my head's above water. Now I'm actually climbing
So
above the
you
water. So
felt like a real shift into just
yeah,
things kind of
and
starting to align and work out easier.
100%.
That
And
kind of stuff.
don't get me wrong, it wasn't easy, and I'm not. It's not sunshine and rainbows all the time. So that it was a big challenge, but I could definitely see now it's day and night compared to what my life used to be to what it is now. And it's sometimes when I'm kind of down or in that kind of mindset, I just look back as to where I've come from to where I am now. I think that helps me massively to kind of move forward.
Yeah, and I think when you reflect on um, things that have happened, things that you were being led towards, and you realize that they have actually helped you in some way, it just kind of strengthens that faith as well. Something I was interested in is, so you've kind of had this whole like transformation. Obviously, your parents are the pastors of this church, so they watched you go away from church and go completely into the world, like you said, like drinking and partying and stuff. That must have been very difficult for them. I don't know if you've spoken to them about it, but I don't know. Do you
Yeah.
know anything about what that was like? How was your relationship with them? Like that must have been tricky.
Yeah, you're right. It was, and I've probably given them a fair share of embarrassment, but they've stuck it out, and they've
Yeah.
been there for me all the time. So I can only thank them for that. But yeah, it was difficult because our relationship kind of, when I moved away from home and started living in the world, our relationship completely fell apart. And I wouldn't even speak to them for months and months and months because I'd just be living
wow.
my life. But they'd always be there to try and call me or try to catch up and stuff like that. And then once, I think, and that's another thing that I forgot, but in the encounter, that was one of the things that kind of took a massive leap forward, where there was probably things that I had to ask for forgiveness for, that I had to forgive them for, and that's what really helped our relationship build. And we're still building our relationship because it's only been about a year since I've had the encounter, but that was a massive change because of the encounter. Was my relationship with my parents, and I can only thank them because obviously they've always been there for me. They've always been there, willing to help, and even when I've been down or coming home drunk at 3 in the morning, they've always been there. But yeah, so my relationship with my parents, it was difficult when I was out in the world, but now it's starting to kind of repair. And I think because I did so much damage when I was out in the world, there's a lot of fixing to do. So I think it's a gradual process that I'm still going through.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that must have been difficult for them to see happen. But at the same time, like you said, they just kind of they kept trying to support you and help. I think that's kind of touched on one issue as well. One thing that I think when you're in the world, you're just completely blind to, but the kind of the reality of the kind of spiritual reality of life. The enemy will attack us through other people in our lives sometimes, and I wonder, like, maybe if the enemy saw a way to get to you, he could kind of use that to kind of potentially like disturb your parents' ministry and try and make things difficult for them as well. And yeah, just the way that the enemy can use other people in our life to kind of to make things tricky for us. But then, so you have this difficult time. You're still kind of talking to them, but not very much. But then you have the encounter, things change, and now you're back at church and you're helping out. You're doing all the tech stuff. You're doing photography, you're doing everything. You're like running the tech side of the church essentially. That must be amazing for them to see. to see you getting so involved now and seeing you develop this relationship and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting you put it like that, because obviously for me, I'm just doing it's I kind of call it my own little ministry, is to because that's
Right,
how
yeah.
I can serve in the church, because that's what I enjoy and this thing I'm kind of good at, should we say. But yeah, it's interesting seeing that from that perspective and from their perspective. And if I'm honest, I still haven't yet sat down and gone through that sort of stuff with them. But yeah, it's interesting
Yeah.
you say it like that, because for them, I can imagine that from where I used to be to where I am now is two completely different
right.
things.
Completely different, because
And
you're
I'm sure.
so involved with church. You're like the backbone of the tech side of things, basically.
No, I'm sure.
Like
I'm
if
sure.
you're not around, there's trouble.
I'm sure it'll be all right once I'm around. But
Um,
no, yeah, you're right, and it's for me being able to serve to that kind of level it's a privilege for me. But I kind of see it as like you got different things. You got the worship team that come here, help people worship. You got the pastors that will give you a message and a sermon. But I see that as kind of my ministry and my way to help people encounter God, or help people have that connection with God, relationship with God. So it's kind of like a hidden sort of ministry, should we say, because you're just facilitating everything else that's happening. But I think it's an important part of the church. And I think that it kind of, a lot of churches don't necessarily invest as much into it. But I think with that, it opens up so many doors to be able to highlight or elevate everything else, like the pastors and the
Definitely,
worship
yeah.
teams. So I think
Yeah,
that's an
I feel
important
like
part of it.
so yeah, it really does. Like, when we've got everything, we have a lot of tech going on, and when we've got the whole band together and everything, and the lyrics and stuff, it really does create a different kind of experience. And I think like it's interesting you touched on, like that's just the kind of stuff that you're interested in anyway. And like it just made me think about the way that God will always kind of, like, there's that famous saying that churches will say, like, come as you are. And it's like God will accept you as you are, whatever point in your life, but he will also be able to use you exactly as you are. Like whatever you're interested is, there'll be some way that you can help and you can minister like in your own way, even if it's maybe not like worship or preaching kind of thing. There's lots of
100%.
different ways God can use people. And that kind of leads really nicely into sort of kind of the last point, the thing that I wanted to talk about. You mentioned like we use a lot of tech here. You're really interested in that stuff. You're always suggesting different like software and platforms and ways of doing things and stuff. Yeah, maybe like, what do you think about like the kind of tech side at church and ways that, like, I know we get really involved with social media now. We're doing this podcast. We're trying to like kind of use tech a lot to kind of get the message out. What do you think about that? And I guess what role do you think it plays in sort of modern ministries?
Yeah, I think the world that we're kind of living in now, where everything is technology, everything is kind of at everyone's fingertips. I think predominantly, if we're talking about in the church itself, let's talk about the Sunday service first. So I think the sort of stuff, the sound, the media, the AV sort of kind of space in a church, I think it's if you're doing it really well, it's unnoticeable by the congregation, should we say. So if you're doing it kind of to the point where no one's really noticing that you're there, but everything else is still happening, that's how you know you're kind of doing it quite well. And I think it's such an important part. Like I said earlier, I think it helps elevate everything else. And I'm not saying it's something you need to be able to reach out, to be able to have that connection with God, but for me, and this is my personal opinion, is that for the team, like the tech team or the stuff that kind of we do, the worship team and the sound team and the AV team, it's the Sunday is our responsibility to help the congregation connect with God. And by being excellent at what we do, it helps the congregation connect with God a lot easier. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying that that's how you connect with God. You need to have the latest and greatest technology to be able to connect to God. But I think it helps facilitate that a lot easier. And if you can imagine, if you're going to watch a film and the sound keeps going up and down, it mutes itself for a bit. it's going to be an
It's like
awful
distracting.
experience. Exactly, it's
Yeah.
distracting. You're not going to enjoy the film, and you're not actually going to be able to connect or watch that film properly. So I think being able to do that background stuff will help then facilitate the front facing stuff. So I think it plays an important sort of role in the church nowadays, especially as you see these mega churches, and I think a lot of churches need to remember that these mega churches, they're it's not norm.
Right. Yeah. Like where they have like thousands of people. It's like a concert,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. And I think this is where a lot of the times, sometimes I get myself into that sort of kind of that rut where
Right. Like we need to get bigger.
Exactly. We need to get bigger. We need to get
need more
they're
speakers.
using that, so we need to use that. So I think, and that's what people need to remember, is that you're not. Don't get me wrong. You could look at those churches and think, yes, that's a great, use their ideas, use their techniques and stuff like that to implement in your church. But you have to remember that the church that you're in is you have to adapt to the congregation, the style of your pastors, the style of your worship team, because your worship team might not be exactly the same as that worship team. So what their needs are different to what your needs are. So I think it's great to look at these churches and seeing how they do it, but making sure that you stay true to your church to make sure that you're actually you're delivering benefits, and you're not just doing it because that church does it and it's the norm, or we want to do it like that, but actually being able to deliver what's the word I'm looking for? I keep forgetting words today, but deliver
yeah, you want it to be like a kind of you want it to feel considered, I guess. And not professional.
I think
professional is not the right word.
No, but yeah,
like,
I think deliver value. That's what
value,
so to actually be able to deliver value from the church. And I think with the worship team and the tech team, I think the Sunday service is kind of, for me, in my opinion, is like a show. Sunday's a show that we facilitate. We put on a show to help these people who are coming in, who are maybe seeking Jesus. It's their first time at church, helping them to connect with God, or to be able to open up a conversation, or open up a relationship with God.
Yeah, I think as well, like I remember when I first came here, like I'd never been to a church before, and I really like having the lyrics there and everything, and having the band, and especially with it being like a smaller size room and having it be filled up with people singing. There is something about that, like it really can touch you, because it's so like music and the things you say all have an impact. They all like have a spiritual reality to them. And yeah, I think when you've got all of this tech stuff working as well, you also have the cameras and you stream everything. So there's been times when I've been at home and I've been able to watch the service and stuff. It all really helps just help people connect and kind of let go of whatever they've kind of brought with them from the week as they come to church, kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's really valuable and important. And yeah, it's like you said, it's kind of something where it's always sort of in the background, but it's a really important part of everything that goes on.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of the main points that I was hoping to touch on. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else that you
No, I think we've covered well, my whole life story, and however long that is. Not very eventful, but yeah. No, I think for me, it's and the message I'd want to kind of tell people in the sort of space that I'm in church, in terms of like that tech, is it's important to want to strive for better, and to progress, to make things better and invest more and kind of do the latest greatest stuff. But I think you need to keep true to your churches and actually look at what the true requirements are for your church, because there's stuff that you want to do out of yourself, but is it actually going to benefit the church, or is it just going to be something that you think is going to be cool, or is going to
we need neons.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you need, neons, lasers everywhere, smoke machines and everything. But that'd be amazing. But is it actually going to benefit the church? And like I said earlier, if you're doing it well, people don't notice it. It's kind of like that thing that just happens, and the thing that people just unconsciously just see or do.
Yeah, nice. Well, I think that's a good point to wrap it up.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing everything. I think it's a really powerful testimony, especially the kind of coming from church, going away and coming back. I'm sure there's lots of people that will be able to relate to that. And yeah, like, thank you for everything you do and all the help. And that brings the podcast to an end. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please remember to like and subscribe and share to as many people as you can. And if there's anyone that you think this testimony would speak to, please share it with them. Our mission is to make Jesus too big to ignore and make disciples of all nations.